There you go. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I just want to thank all of you who are joining us today. This is our first try having a session over Zoom. And so we appreciate you being with us and giving us grace. So our first session, it's going to be about an hour. We'll have Jennifer presenting for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have questions. I have help this morning from our development department, Donna Coetzer and Sarah Kazin, who is going to be helping me on the back end here. So my name is, if you don't know who I am, I'm Heather Long, and I'm the Director of Family Support Services here at the ARC of San Antonio. And I've been here with the ARC for over 25 years, and it's my home away from home. One of the things that we really want to do is try to figure out other topics that you might be interested in. We will continue to have our series, our transition series that we have had for many years on planning for the future, but we'd also like to add some additional topics that families really feel like could assist them. And that's why we're bringing you this topic today, and it's special education tips for returning from distance learning. And so just a couple of housekeeping things. We put everybody on mute and your videos, so we won't see your lovely faces. But if you have any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat and we will address those at the end. We're going to be recording the session, and once it's recorded, we'll place it on our website and also on Facebook. So that's it for our housekeeping. And I just wanted to introduce our speaker. I've had the pleasure of knowing Jennifer Fitzhugh for many, many years. And she's always been my go-to if I have questions about special education. She's been an amazing advocate in the community. She's worked previously as an administrator in the school district for 20 years. And so she's got a wealth of experience on both sides of the coin. She has two lovely children. She has Seth, and he's 26, and he's diagnosed with glucose transporter deficiency syndrome. And he's lovely. And then there's Emma, and she's 22, and she's an interpreter for the deaf in Washington, D.C. So two amazing children. But I'm really excited that Jennifer could meet with us today. I've received many calls from families who, have been struggling with distance learning and really trying to figure out what is the best way for their child to be provided services through the school district when you're on a computer. And it's been a challenge for a lot of families, but then also for some families, it's been great. It's been a good experience. So, but one of the topics that's really come up a lot for me is families trying to understand what the terminology compensatory services versus extended school year. And Jennifer and I had a long discussion on that kind of early on even about what that means for families. And so I felt it really important to have her come and talk to you all just about what that is and things that families need to do that will help them as they return to some normalcy with school. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jennifer so she can get started. And then again, we'll have questions toward the end. All right, thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, Heather, for having me today. It's my pleasure to be here. This unique way of communicating seems to be becoming our new norm, but I kind of like it. It's nice. So thank you all for joining us this morning. And hopefully I can answer some questions and address any concerns that you may have regarding special education and returning from this unusual times that we find ourselves in. So, as Heather mentioned, I've been part of this community, the special education community, 27 years and am very, very happy to be working with so many wonderful families throughout the state of Texas. So it's my pleasure to be here this morning. So let's jump right in and let's start with the first slide and let me see what I can share with you. So there have been a lot of questions and there is quite a bit of guidance on the Texas Education Agency website. I don't want to misname it, but I think it's tea.state.tex. But anyway, just Google Texas Education Agency and they will pop up immediately. And there is a lot of guidance there about COVID-19 and how this is really unprecedented and we're kind of feeling our way through all of this. But the most important thing with all of these concerns of understanding what to expect and how distance learning works for all of our kiddos and compensatory education, the most important thing, other than we all remain healthy, is how are we going to manage this? How are we going to get through this? Because FAPE, a free appropriate public education, is still mandated for our kiddos. So we need to keep that in mind, that regardless of a pandemic or not, we need to address how our kiddos are going to receive their free appropriate public education. So, and please forgive me if I use an acronym. I will try to go back and explain it. The world of special education is filled with acronyms. So I'm going to try to make sure that I keep all of them spelled out for you. So keeping in mind that our kiddos need to receive their free appropriate public education, how are we going to do that? And one of the biggest questions I've faced from my families during this pandemic is, what are the expectations? I can't help my 7th grader do pre-algebra. I don't know how to do Common Core math. So it was very overwhelming for a lot of parents to try to sit down and help kiddos when they weren't certified teachers. They certainly didn't understand how to provide the curriculum to their loved one, and certainly with accommodations or modifications. So how did we do that? So I tried to reassure everyone that during this pandemic, the education system realizes that we are not educators. We are not designed to be teaching our kiddos at home. We're going to do the best we can to supplement the curriculum that they're receiving. But that being said, new material was really not to be presented during this time, knowing that we could not teach our children brand new material because we are not certified educators. So that being said, I would try to remind my families, please remember that it's to kind of review and do the best you can with what you have, because everyone's bringing something different to the table, and that our expectations are not that your child master the last 9 weeks of a brand new curriculum. And that goes for all students. We were really just trying to keep our heads above water and make sure that our kiddos were learning something maybe they had already learned, or were maintaining their level of learning throughout the break, the pandemic. So I think it's important to understand that there was not an expectation per se that your child was going to master an entire new curriculum. So I wanted to put a lot of families at ease that we were just trying to make it through this pandemic with a level of education that was either where they left off in March when this hit, or just to maintain their learning expectations through the end of the year. Distance learning was another big concern. How do I access it? Many families do not have access to distance learning, and it may have looked different for every child in every school district. Some districts gave out paper packets, and they may have dropped them off. They may have asked parents to pick them up. Some districts may have accessed online learning, teletherapy, if you will. If your child has speech, if your child receives a related service such as occupational therapy or physical therapy, those may have been attempted very difficultly, I'm sure, on teletherapy. But nonetheless, not everyone has the same access to distance learning. So some districts may have provided just a Zoom classroom for everyone to attend. Some districts may have reached out specifically to you. Your child's case manager at Hope would have reached out to you and touched base and made contact and said, how is your kiddo doing with all of this learning? Is there anything I can do to support their learning? Is there a lesson I can explain or an activity I can share with you? But I wanted to remind my families along the way that they are not the educators, and to constantly be reminding the educators themselves that you would do the best you could, but that you were not necessarily going to take the place of the speech language pathologist. And so we would need to then come to bullet 3, which is compensatory education. If I can't provide the free appropriate public education that my kiddos are entitled to during this pandemic, then how are we going to meet that need? And that's where compensatory education comes in. There has been a lot of controversy about compensatory education, that just that simple, that terminology, because normally we reserve that for when a school district has been deficient in providing FAPE, a free appropriate public education, and we have to talk about how to make up for those services. So in my mind, that is kind of a punitive term. But it's not really in this case, because no one could help the pandemic. No one's at fault here, if you will. So we have to talk about compensatory education in the light of what was missed and how can we make up for that. Now, I want to make sure that it's perfectly clear that, and this was interesting to me because in my mind, I was constantly thinking, well, it's automatically going to be discussed in every ARD we call, or IEP meeting, if you're not from Texas, that we call when we return to school. But as I learned from the Houston Chronicle Denied article a few years back, compensatory education is not necessarily going to be laid out on the red carpet for you when you come back to school. It's going to be up to us to reach out and say, I feel that my child has missed X number of hours of services, and we need to discuss how we're going to make those services up. So that's why I put in parentheses, must be discussed, because it's not going to be automatic. It is not going to be something that the district is more than likely going to call and say, let's talk about how much time we owe you, because they have a lot of kiddos and a lot of time owed and really are going to be feeling the heat from this. So we are going to have to work together to come up with how much time did we miss and how are we going to make that up? Okay, next slide. Okay, so the expectations, and we talked about this a little bit already, are we're not teaching new material. During the pandemic, there was hopefully not a new math equation presented to your child or a new period in history. It's essentially to maintain those skills that your child was hopefully working on prior to the break. Understanding that you are not a classroom teacher and that it's not meant for every student. It's kind of repetitive, that it's not meant for every student. But the important thing is that you did the best you could given the situation. And a lot of parents were concerned about grades. And I can't speak to each individual district about grades, but what I can tell my families is, look at your report card. It is important, but if your child has an IEP, that is way more important. We want to look at where your child was. And the beauty of this, if there is a beauty of having a pandemic, is that in March, right around the time that schools ceased to open in the brick and mortar fashion, IEP progress reports were due. So the beauty of that is new data has been shared, hopefully. If they didn't mail it to you, you can ask them for it. But that new data has been given to us regarding where our kiddos were currently progressing at the time of the break. And so the nice part of that is we will have very good data, hopefully, as to where our kiddos ended the brick and mortar school year. And then certainly if we worked with our kiddos at home, or even if we didn't, we can go, okay, this is where we are now. And we're going to talk about how we can figure out what to do going forward. But this situation was not ideal for every child. I realized that some kiddos cannot sit in front of a computer screen. Some kiddos cannot even identify the lesson, maybe the person. That would be great if your teacher popped on and you were able to kind of say, oh, hello, I miss you. Why are you on my screen? But our kiddos do not see mom and dad or grandma as a teacher. And trying to take on that role, that is very, very difficult for our kiddos to understand. And so I'm sure we've seen an increase in behaviors, anxiety, not really understanding why I can't get on the yellow bus and go to school. and certainly why I'm not seeing my teachers and my friends and all of those things that come with a brick and mortar building. So we realize that this in and of itself has been somewhat overwhelming, and everything that's overwhelming for the majority of us is 10 times overwhelming for our kiddos. So really just trying to make sure that we offer the best we can for our kids to get through. And sometimes that's just getting up and getting dressed and having breakfast. And if we did that and we maybe went out of the house to walk around where there aren't people, that's great. So I want you to kind of take a deep breath and say, I did the best I could, because we're going to have to face what comes next, hopefully in August. Okay, next slide. Okay, so some of the things that we may have talked about, that we may have seen, the teletherapy has been very difficult. And a lot of times when my parents say, I can't do speech with my kiddo, my advice to them is, okay, so we got a continuancy plan from the school district that says that they'll provide X number of minutes of speech, but I'm not able to sit next to them or to help them focus or to do the activity that the speech therapist wants us to do. So how do we address that? And my response to them is simply, if you're in agreement with the continuity plan and you're okay with the number of minutes that are provided to your child, just explain, I will do the best that I can do to help my child access either Zoom with their classmates or a one-on-one Zoom with their teacher. But make note in writing on the continuity plan that you cannot reasonably provide the same services that are in their IEP. That is not your job as their parent or their grandparent or even their caregiver at home. And so that being said, you will do the best you can, but you're not going to replace the services that the child is entitled to. In other words, the 30 minutes a week, 7 out of 14 weeks of speech therapy, or the 45 minutes of in-class support for English language arts or for reading. You just simply can't meet all of those roles in your child's life. And so my recommendation is just whatever it is, whether it's the teletherapy or the Zoom. Sometimes the Zoom is nice because simply it's just a matter of kind of sitting and getting, which is a little more like class. But then when you sit down and you actually have to work on an activity, which we know that the population of students with intellectual disabilities have been the most affected by this, because it is the most difficult for them to sit and get. Their activities need to be kinesthetic, they need to be hands-on, they need to have meaning behind them, they need to get up and do in order to oftentimes understand what it is that they're trying to accomplish and learn. And so these methodologies don't work very well with a lot of our kiddos, and that's okay. That's all right. So just make note that you cannot reasonably, and your continuity plans have probably already been turned in. But if they haven't, you can always write an addendum or a memo to your case manager. Be sure it's in writing, saying, I did the best I could on the continuity plan, but we will need to talk about compensatory services because I could not reasonably provide the services that are in my child's IEP during the pandemic. Next screen. Okay, so a lot of parents say, how am I going to get compensatory education? What is this going to look like? So here are a lot of ways we're going to need to go about this. Unfortunately, you have to be the data collector, and that's really not too complicated. I believe TEA, and if not, I have access to another company that has created a log, if you will, a data collection sheet that I can probably get my hands on that will help you kind of say, okay, in March, and let's look at the March IEP. If you didn't get it, just go ahead and reach out and ask for it. They should have mailed it to you or emailed it to you. But sometimes, especially because we went into a pandemic, right, kind of in the middle of spring break, that may have been left off or forgotten. So let's get the March IEP. And let's look at where your child was making progress toward those goals. Were they at 20% of recognizing their letters or 40%? And then if we haven't done already, or we don't know during COVID, where was he toward that goal? Did he learn any new letters? Did he forget some letters? And things like that. Let's look at some of the goals and objectives and try to get an idea on how we can determine where our kiddo is right now in June, now that school's out. Because what we're going to need to do is come back and revisit that data, hopefully, fingers crossed, in August. And we're going to need to determine, okay, we missed this number of days, this number of weeks, translates into this number of hours that we need to talk about making up or compensating for. When you have a kiddo that has perhaps a behavior goal, that's a lot harder to measure. For example, will stay on task for 5 minutes, or will refrain from using inappropriate language 4 out of 5 days of the week. Well, that's kind of hard. If your kiddo doesn't demonstrate that behavior at home, you really cannot collect data on that. So that's going to be a tough one, because we're going to have to simply pick up with the data that we had when your child was in the brick and mortar building, and we're going to have to go from there. So some of these IEP goals and objectives you may not even be able to collect data on, and that's okay too. We'll just mark it as not applicable, and we'll still continue to look at how we need to pick up that goal when school resumes. Conversely, if your child does demonstrate some behaviors that you see at home, and perhaps they are worse than they were in school, note that as well. So let's say the school district noted that your child could recognize, and this has actually happened with a family I'm working with right now. The school district said that the young man had mastered his ability to count coins and dollar bills up to, say, $20. And he was at 100%. But when he got home with mom, he absolutely could not do that skill. Maybe he recognized some coins and some dollars, but when you put them all together, he absolutely could not do that. So I just told her, write down what he can and can't do. She actually took some video of him doing it, which I think is fantastic, because you can't really argue with video. It is what it is. And she was able to share that with me, and she was able to share that with the school district. And I think it's great to kind of see, because parents' eyes are really opening now as to, oh my goodness, my child does have the skills I thought they had, or my child does not have the skills I thought they had. And so it's very important to keep that data, and that's really easy. Just take a picture or take a video, and then you don't have to write anything down. Remember, I'm trying to make this as easy as possible on anyone who has to collect data, because it is a very time-consuming task. And so when you look at the goals and objectives, and then you look at the schedule of services, it's written out into number of minutes per week normally, or number of minutes per day. And so obviously we're not going to be able to replicate every single minute that the child has missed. Now, some parents will be very adamant. They want every single minute back, and we'll have to negotiate how we're going to do that. But I think overall it's important to look at how much time would my child have received, whether it's in class support from a teacher pushing in and working with your child and 5 others or 10 others, or is it individual time that my child was removed from the classroom and really worked on those individual skills, those learning new concepts, if you will. And so we're going to have to differentiate between time that was shared and time that was strictly given just to your child. Even, for example, in a group speech therapy, sometimes we may see 2 or 3 kiddos, and that speech language pathologist divides their time among all 3 kiddos, because maybe they all need to work on conversation skills or turn taking or making eye contact with each other. So it's important to know that we're not going to be able to put an exact number or science to how much is missed. So I think we have to kind of back up a little bit and look at the overall goal of how are they doing on their data? How are they doing on their progress? Because that's going to really determine if we really need to look at every single minute, or if we can kind of say, you know what, I feel good about this. I worked one-on-one with my kiddo and they rocked it, and I'm ready to go back to school and pick up where we left off. And there'll be everything in between. So I expect we'll have a lot of parents that want minute for minute. I expect we'll have parents that say, we're good. I'm just happy that we made it out alive and we're going back to school and I don't have to do this anymore. And then in between, we'll have, okay, let's look at how many minutes we need to go back and compensate for. We talked a little bit about the continuity plan. If you still have it, you might want to go back and look and see what it said. But the continuity plan was, if you will, a replacement to to what was being provided in the brick and mortar building, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not we needed to do an IEP amendment. And I'd be very curious to know how many of you did do an IEP amendment to change your child's schedule of services in the time of COVID. But the continuity plan, as I understand it, was designed to take the place of an IEP amendment so that we could have a temporary plan in place, and we would not have to go back and do hundreds of thousands of IEP changes during this time of virtual learning. So if your continuity plan offered a certain number of minutes, you can go back and look, did we actually receive what was listed on the plan? And how does that compare with what was listed in my kiddo's IEP? So I think it's important to know what they were getting in the traditional building and what they were getting in the virtual building, if you will. So when we return to the building, hopefully in August, it's going to be a new world for us, because we think about, well, our kiddos didn't finish the last 9 weeks of the school year. So how are they going to be ready to move into the next school year? And I think one of the things that perhaps I didn't list in my presentation, but I know wants to be discussed, is extended school year. Because a lot of thought and discussion has gone into, is extended school year the opportunity to make up for COVID-19? And it's not. And the reason being is because extended school year is designed to supplement or maintain the skills that may have not been maintained during a break for this school year. And the problem with that is, which it actually seems like it would be perfect for that, because if we lost 9 weeks, we should need to be able to make up 9 weeks. But we're going to need to look at that a year from now. And the problem is, because we don't have the data as a committee, and our committee has not sat down and looked at the data that says this is where our kiddo was in March and this is where they now are in August. And based on all of that, we have this much regression, and it's going to take us X number of weeks to get that regression back. And if we can't get it back in X number of weeks, usually 6 to 9, we're going to have to talk about ESY, or extended school year. So we can't really do that right now, because we have to have the two parts, the one of where we were in March, we have that, and the one of where we're going to be in August. We don't have that yet. So we can't do extended school year to compensate for COVID-19 at this time. But that doesn't mean that when we come back in August and we look at the second part of that data, that we can then say, okay, let's see how he gets back into the routine and how she picks up with her goals and objectives. And if we do not see by the middle of October, which is the first 9-week grading period, the first 9 weeks of when we generally see an IEP progress report, we need to see whether or not she was able to recoup those skills. Because if your child's not able to recoup those skills, we need to have that ESY discussion, and we need to have that compensatory service discussion. So one of the things that I'm recommending is in August, when hopefully teachers go back on contract, and I keep saying hopefully because I keep hearing all these stories about different calendars, and I think everything is just so up in the air right now with what's going to happen. So I don't want to just presume that we'll all be back in school on August 17th. But when teachers get back on contract, we need to start requesting ARD meetings and to talk about regression, to talk about compensatory services and the continuity plan. And again, it's not going to be, more than likely, they're going to be overwhelmed with their data and their meetings. So the district is probably not going to reach out to you to schedule those meetings. So the burden will be on us to say, we would like a meeting, and we definitely need to put those requests in writing. There is not a legal time frame for requesting an ARD and getting an answer. However, if we're talking about evaluation data, there is a legal time frame. And so sometimes when an ARD is requested, I say, let's try to, at least give 5 days to get response in the meeting schedule. But anything longer than that then tends to fall into delaying or denying services. And then that can be a violation. So we want to make sure that we get these ARD requests in writing so that we have the ability to go back and say, oh, I requested an ARD on August the 10th, but I haven't heard yet. So let's go ahead and send a second request and see if we can get that meeting on the calendar. Because let's face it, educators are going to be inundated when we do return to the building. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I didn't put a lot of information in this because I felt like there was probably going to be a lot of questions. And I want to individualize the questions that you may have. I want to be able to talk about what your plan perhaps maybe look like, or questions that you may have on how we're going to get back to the way it was, if you will. So, and I don't know where we are on time, Heather, but
we're good. We're at 10:30, so we have plenty of time.
okay.
So yeah, and so please, feel free to submit some questions. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about when folks, or if folks have had to have any kind of evaluation, or
Sure.
how has that happened over
Sure.
this time? Tell me some of your experiences with that.
Okay, and that's a great question, because we know that even in the time, even though the school district stopped with services because of the COVID, evaluation timelines were still at play here. And so one of the things that I learned throughout this process, I've been attending a lot of legal webinars to try to make sure I understand what is coming down from the top, is that the evaluation timeline, for example, in Texas, when we have 45 calendar days to evaluate and 30 school days to then reconvene an ARD meeting, where were we in that process? And the belief is if we were pretty much through the process, in other words, parents had filled out all their paperwork, the licensed specialist and school psychologist or the diagnostician had done their part of the paperwork, and all we really needed was that last 30-day component of coming back together, then we did that. We had several ARD meetings virtually to go over the evaluation results. And even in some circumstances, parents had presented evaluation results to the district, whether they were medical or from a previous district, and that district used the information that they had to determine that there was the two-pronged criteria, a disability combined with an educational need. And as such, there was a need to go ahead and start initial special education services. So the evaluation timeline really did hold true for the most part, unless you were at the very beginning. Because at the very beginning, and you had the evaluation was just requested, let's say March 15th or March 10th, really the process was not able to begin. Parents were maybe able to complete the forms, but other than that, most of an evaluation process must be done face-to-face. Testing protocols require a certain number of prompts, certain number of minutes to wait for the answer. Some of them are timed, and really that can not be done virtually and obtain valid results. So if you were in the testing process when COVID-19 hit, it's important to know that that will then resume when school starts. And let's say, for example, you were 15 days into the process, then we still have 30 days left. So here's the part that got a little confusing to me, though, and I don't want to try to confuse you, but TEA classified some of these days as instructional prep and instructional learning, okay? Meaning the days that educators were on contract. So in other words, they were working, but some days they were prepping and some days they were teaching. Now, it's my understanding that the Texas Education Agency is only counting the days of instruction. In other words, the days that teachers were teaching as toward the 45 school days. So we may have some issues with, this was really 45 school days, but maybe not all 45 of those school days were school days. They were days that the teachers were prepping. So we may find ourselves in disagreement with probably 5 or 10 days, no more than 10 days, I would think, of how much time did we lose in that evaluation process. So give some grace, and let's try to compromise on, well, you had 45 school days to do this testing, and this is how many we lost to COVID, so let's pick up from there and go forward. So normally where we see probably about the middle of October, we would see testing come due that was requested at the end of the year, we may be closer to Thanksgiving. And hopefully that won't be the case, but we may have to talk about compensatory services as a result. Does that help?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. I didn't mean to confuse anyone with those days, but that really threw me off when I was reading. Even though the teachers were working, we can't count all of them as instructional days because our kids weren't always being instructed. So.
Okay, great.
Were there other questions that I can answer?
Next question is, can we ask the school district for compensation for hiring a certified teacher to tutor your student?
Ooh, that's a great question. That's a great question. Probably we can always ask. However, it's not a matter of school districts are going to open up the checkbook and say, let us pay you for what you had to provide. So what I would recommend is you hold on to that information, how much you've paid and for what hours did you pay, because if we cannot negotiate something through the ARD process as far as compensatory services, then we may need to talk about dispute resolution. So I don't think right off the bat, no, a school district is not going to just say, yes, we can pay you for your private tutor, because from their perspective, they did the best they could given that time. However, this is a new era. We have not gone down this road before. So if we need to look at compensatory services in the form of, well, my child was unable to access online learning, so therefore I supplemented it with an in-person learning and I paid this person, then we may be able to talk about how to get that reimbursement. No guarantees, but I definitely think we can ask for that and we can discuss what that might look like for you. That's a very good question.
Okay, we have another question.
Go ahead.
I'll read it. If we elect to continue virtual learning due to medical concerns of contracting the virus, what rights will our students continue to have? For example, will they continue to be offered virtual therapies? Can electing this option open the district up to changing the student's IEP?
It is my understanding that yes, there's a special education connection that talks about a lot of situations that will come up in this scenario. And one of them is just this. Parents will find that their children do much better in home with that one-on-one learning environment. Conversely to the child that says, you are not my teacher and I'm not going to learn from you, you're my mom or dad. And some children have just flourished. So that being said, we have to come back together as an ARD committee, and you need to bring that data and show that in school your child was making X number of progress, but at home with individualized instruction, and you'll have to have the data to back it up, your child was making greater progress, and you feel like that is the least restrictive environment for your child. Because remember, the driving law behind the free appropriate public education under IDEA is the least restrictive environment. And my favorite expression is there's no special ed Walmart. So we always have to remember that exposure to non-disabled peers is important. Now I realize medical concerns are huge and we want to keep our kiddo safe. And that, I couldn't agree with that more. My 26-year-old is right here home with me until I feel it is safe for him to return to his home. So that being said, you may have found the perfect solution for your child. Educated at home, not exposed to the virus, and we have to come to an ARD and we have to discuss what that's going to look like for you. For example, when kiddos, go homebound, we have to talk about how long is that homebound that the doctor's prescribing and how many hours a week of services would that child receive. So it's up to the ARD committee to decide what fate looks like for each child. And if that is what you believe is the most appropriate and least restrictive for your child, we have to bring that to the committee. So absolutely, I can see that being a situation that many families might find themselves in and many ARD committees have to discuss.
Awesome. Okay, next question. And let me go ahead and say who sent the question. That might be helpful. This is from Emma Fitzhugh.
Hi, Emma.
If brick and mortar school does not return this fall, do you believe that could result in an excess of compensatory services that the school might not be able to provide given the many months of distance learning?
Absolutely. Read it again. Yes, she's so
Yeah,
wordy. Love
I
it.
know. If brick and mortar school does not return, do you believe that could result in an excess of compensatory services that the school might not be able to provide given the many months of the distance learning?
That's such a good question. I'm so proud of her. Yes, I mean, I really feel that they're going to be overwhelmed. I mean, I can think of just your most basic kiddo that maybe has some consultative support, you know, where the teachers just kind of talk about what his needs are, which is the least restrictive services ever. I mean, sometimes I think, why do we even have an IEP for this? That maybe we can negotiate that. But when you move beyond that, 30 minutes a week of speech, and you've missed 9 weeks, and now you have to pile those 9 weeks on with your current 30 minutes a week. Wow, there's not enough minutes in the day for a speech language pathologist to get to all the kiddos, to get to the services they need, and then to get to the services they need just because we're back in school. So I don't know how they are going to manage doubling up or even tripling up with all of this compensatory service, which is why I don't think they're going to open the door and say, let us give you all these services. It's going to be a matter of, we must ask, and we must discuss, and we must negotiate in the ARD committee, how much time do we feel we really need to make up? Because I don't think we're going to be able to make up 30 minutes a week every single week for 36 weeks. I mean, if there's 36 weeks in a school year, we'd have to do every single week, sometimes twice a week. And unless they plan on hiring a whole batch of new providers, I don't see that happening. So that's a great question. Good job, Emma.
All right, next question is from Chris Lane Puente. Jennifer, both of my children qualify for special ed under different eligibilities. I do not want to be overly aggressive with the school. However, my plan is to call an ARD meeting after the first 6 weeks, face-to-face or virtual, to see how the district is going to reteach or teach what was missed with stronger data collected. Any thoughts on that?
Hi, Chris Lane. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think you're giving the grace of that first 6 weeks, because I think a lot of families are going to be very anxious about, we're going back, and I want my kid to learn right away. But you and I both know that that first 6 to 9 weeks, we're just getting back into the routine. We've been gone for so long. We need plenty of opportunities to get comfortable and get learning initiated again. So I think that 6 to 9 weeks is absolutely the best time to sit down with the committee and say, this is where we are now, and this is where we were in March, and this is how much we've lost, and this is how much I'd like to get back. But I do believe that, and you know this, data collection is going to be huge, because if we don't bring to the table the data to support that loss of learning from March to June or from March to August, it's going to be very difficult to then negotiate for makeup services. So absolutely, I think heavy data collection, as you put it, is the key. And maybe even through the summer, spot checking, so that we can say, oh, we still don't have that, or we lost that, because that's all going to contribute to how much time we need to provide on the other end. So that's a great question.
Okay, we had a follow-up question from Danielle Edwards, and Danielle had asked the previous question about can we elect to continue virtual learning if there's medical concerns? And so she is asking, if the district offers virtual learning options for all, it is my or she's stating, it is my understanding that special ed students can also take that option. If they do not offer virtual learning and parent elects to keep them home due to the medical risks, would the school then push for homebound? Do you think the school will be making that then a homebound situation?
Well,
or what is the difference? Maybe talk about.
Okay, so homebound is an instructional, our kiddos are placed, they're coded with instructional arrangements based on what type of special education services they receive. Homebound / hospital is the most restrictive placement. So it is looked at somewhat negatively in that we're not with our non-disabled peers in the continuum of services. And so, but I get that. I'm not arguing it. I'm just kind of stating the perspective of why it's got a negative connotation, because it's so restrictive. The school district is not going to initiate homebound. And you are absolutely correct. If a general education is getting virtual learning, then a child receiving special education services should also get virtual learning. It's quid pro quo, one for the other. However, if the ARD committee chooses to provide in-home services, whether it's homebound because your doctor writes a letter stating that homebound is the most appropriate, least restrictive setting for your child to learn and to remain safe, then the ARD committee has to sit down and decide how many hours per day or per week will homebound be provided. And generally speaking, it's about 4 hours of education a week. It's very minimal. So, but again, it's individualized per student. So some students may need more. Some students can't tolerate even 4 hours and may need less. So that being said, if general ed students are still receiving virtual learning, special education students also would receive virtual learning. Homebound is not going to be initiated by the district. Okay, that would definitely need to come from you, primarily your physician. If they feel that there's a medical need for your child to stay home, then absolutely, we as an ARD committee need to sit down and talk about how many hours is that going to look like, and is it going to be, because there's an educational responsibility for the school district to provide FAPE. And so if you're providing the virtual learning, and maybe that's not what you were getting at earlier, I'm sorry if I misunderstood the question, but if you're providing the virtual learning, then the school system is not. So we may talk about a homebound teacher who would come in and provide the virtual learning, even though it's not really virtual, but it's in home instead of online. I hope that cleared it up a little bit.
All right, the last question here. If your child didn't have access to distance learning like peers, what can I request to compensate for that?
One more time. Sorry, I'm such a visual learner.
No, that's okay. If your child didn't have access to distance learning like peers, like the computer, what can I request to compensate for that?
I need a little more.
I'm sorry, I don't have a name. Yeah, I don't have a name here.
Let me ask you a question. Did your child receive packets? I mean, was there anything provided, I guess? Because again, we want to look at what was done for one. I've heard some school districts who reached out every day, teachers, special education teachers, general education teachers. But then I've heard some that received absolutely nothing, no contact at all. There was no virtual learning. There was no paper learning. There was just nothing. It was as if schools were closed. Okay, nothing, no contact? Is
Nothing,
that
no contact, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, wow. So then we're going to have to go back and count all of his minutes. And we're going to have to say, this is the number of minutes that was there a continuity plan where they were going to at least offer a portion of the minutes? Because we would at least need to have, well, if I promised you 30 minutes a week, I'm going to give you 30 minutes a day. No general ed. Okay. So that's going to be a lot of time, because if I remember correctly, that's 180 minutes a day of general ed time. Now remember, other kiddos were not getting those 180 minutes a day, but they were getting something. So we have to find out, and this is going to be important, if you know of another student that was in his general education class, we need to find out what they received. We need to, because the teachers are required to keep data on the services that they're providing. So we need to reach out and find out what were other kiddos in his general education class getting, because that's exactly what he's entitled to as well. So if none of the general education students were getting virtual services or packets or one-on-one with the teachers, then neither was he. But I find that a little bit hard to believe, because that doesn't constitute FAPE. So we're probably going to have to find out what it looked like for everyone else, and what services were provided. I'm surprised if there was nothing, but it could be. And then we'd have to go back and make up, what, 180 minutes a day for how many days did we miss school? My goodness. Yeah, that's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, she's saying the teacher never did reach out, so. Yeah.
That's unfortunate. And, you know, I mean, it's my understanding that the teachers were on contract and were being paid. You know, and some of my family said, look, I heard from the general education teacher all the time, but I never heard from the special education teacher. And to me, that's a little sad, because that's the person, that's your child's case manager. That's the person that manages their IEPs and their progress reports and their goals and objectives, and makes sure that they're making adequate progress toward those goals and objectives. So that's a little disheartening for me to hear that maybe a kiddo was kind of left out there without services at all during this pandemic.
Yeah, and here's an opposite question from Katrina Martinez. What if a teacher called a parent daily, offered online learning, virtual live learning, and paper packets, and the parent never answered? Does the district need to provide compensation services?
Well, it depends. I mean, again, maybe they didn't have a phone. Maybe the phone isn't working. There's lots of reasons why perhaps the parent was just trying to put food on the table and keep the lights on during this pandemic. So again, the onus falls on the school district. We really need to look at, they reached out, they did what they could. But again, when it's a matter of, in a pandemic, we're just trying to survive. Some people are just trying to survive. Education is not at the top 3 right now. So yes, I believe we're going to have to sit down and talk about, okay, we weren't able to make this happen during COVID-19, but how can we make it happen now? Because we know a lot of families, you know, maybe even missed out on some meals because they weren't at school. So we really, really have to look at each situation independently and individually and decide, how can we make up for this? Of course, they will document their efforts to reach you and their efforts to try to get with you. But again, we can't necessarily fault you, because that may not have been a system that worked for you. So we'll have to revisit that as an ARD committee and decide, what do we need to do to make up for that? So absolutely, that's a great question.
All right, I think that's all of our questions.
Oh, I thought I saw it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was just a statement. There was the last statement from Danielle, and it just encouraging families to contact the school to make sure that they have the correct numbers and addresses on file, which is a great suggestion.
That's a wonderful. Yes. Yes.
Well, and I think my biggest I have a lot of takeaways from this, but one of my takeaways is you got to really ask for these compensatory services. They're not going to be knocking down or beating down your door to offer them. And they're busy. Things are going on. So it's good to know that given that direction, that you need to ask for the service.
Yes. And I should have known that, because I recently worked with Shelby Webb, a reporter from the Houston Chronicle. She's going to kind of publish a new series on a follow-up to The Denied that Brian Rosenthal published. And that, you know, that article was big on compensatory education to make up for the number of kids that were not identified over that 10 or 11 years. And so that being said, you know, Shelby made it perfectly clear when we were visiting with schools that, you know, there is a screen for it, but the reason why so much compensatory service was not discussed in ARD meetings after it was discovered that many, many kids were not identified or served is because parents did not ask. Parents did not ask. And I really should have clued into that earlier, that absolutely we have to ask. It is not going to be laid out for us that this is what we owe you. You know, just kind of like every other right that you have to an independent evaluation or, you know, extended time. You have to be that advocate and come in and say, let's talk about compensatory education. Let's talk about, you know, and luckily it affected all of us. There's not some, you know, in the Denied article, there were people that, you know, lots of people that perhaps were left out, or people that made it all the way through the school system and were never identified and they moved on. But in this situation, everyone was affected. And so everyone needs to come to the table and say, let's talk about compensatory services. Let's talk about how we're going to make up for what was missed. So that's a great thought. But anyway, I really appreciate all your questions. And again, if you need any resources, feel free to reach out to me. Text or email is the best because I can respond the quickest. But I encourage you to look at the Texas Education Agency's website. Say that 3 times fast. And there's a lot of information about distance learning and COVID-19. And I believe yesterday, the Special Education Director for Texas Education Agency, Justin Porter, was doing a webinar. I was unable to attend because I was in a mediation, but I'm pretty sure they broadcast it, they replay it, and he was talking some more about compensatory services in COVID-19. So
Awesome. Well, Jennifer, we really appreciate you giving us your time today. And I'm a little disappointed Alexander the cat didn't come join us during the
no,
presentation.
I had him put away. He wouldn't interfere.
Okay. All right.
Our learning.
But just a few things to wrap up. We're going to be sending out a survey. We'd love to get some feedback from everyone that attended today. Please let us know any future presentations that you'd be interested in. We'll make sure to have Jennifer's information and sent out to you. And also there was your data collection sheet. We could probably send that out along with it if you want to send that, and we could send that out.
Absolutely. I will attempt to locate that after this and have it readily available for anyone who needs it.
Okay, awesome. So our next session will be on the 25th of June, and it's going to be a presentation with Sam Gonzalez at Region 20. He's going to be talking about transition services,
Yay.
Transition 101. Yeah, his baby. So stay tuned for that. Look for more information about that, and we'll be posting this recording on our website and Facebook. So that's it for now, and just we want to thank everybody for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.